So we're going to find our x-intercepts by factoring. You can call your x-intercepts roots or zeros. They're these points right here where your parabola crosses the x-axis. We're going to factor this trinomial and find our zeros by grouping. And we'll do grouping through this method. I'm going to take my first coefficient and my last coefficient, and I'm going to multiply them together. So 4 times negative 3. And when I do that, I get negative 12. And my goal is to find factors of negative 12, and I want them to add, and I'm going to do a highlighter here. I want them to add to this middle term right here. So I'm going to find factors of negative 12. I'm going to start with 1. 1 times negative 12 multiplies to negative 12. And then negative 1 times 12 multiplies to negative 12. 2. 2 times negative 6 and negative 2 times 6. Those will multiply to negative 12. And then I'll go to 3. 3 times negative 4 and negative 3 times 4. So these are all my options of the numbers that multiply to negative 12. What I want to find is these factors that multiply to negative 12, which ones add to this middle term right here of 11. Well, if I go in here, the first one, I say, what does 1 plus negative 12, so I'm going to do this, what does, what do these guys, what does this guy add to? Well, it adds to negative 11, and this one adds to a positive 11. This one right here, this adds to a negative 4, and this one adds to a positive 4. This one adds to a negative 1, and this one adds to a positive 1. Well, I want the one that adds to positive 11, so that's going to be this one right here, this one right here. These add to a positive 11, but really what I want is a positive 11x. So I'm going to make this a negative 1x and a positive 12x. And I'm going to do a substitution. So when I do this, I'm going to take this stuff right here and I'm going to swap it out with this stuff right here. I'm going to swap those out. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my 4x squared. I'm going to rewrite my negative 3, and that's this guy right here, and this guy right here, and my equals 0. That all stays. And then where I swap it out, I'm going to put in my negative 1x and my positive 12x instead of my 11x. And now that I've done this, I can factor this by grouping. And so I'm going to break this into two pieces. I'm going to put a little squiggly line right here so that I can include the sign on that second group. This is where I'm going to divide this equation in half. And I'm going to factor the first two terms, and then I'm going to factor the second two terms. When I factor the first two terms, I find what divides into both 4 and 1. Well, they're both divisible by 1. And then the smallest amount of x's, well, this has the least amount of x's because the power is only 1. That's what I can divide out of both of these. So I write down what it is that I've divided out, and then I do the division to see what's left over. 4 divided by 1, well, that's going to be 4. And then x squared over x. Well, this right here, this is really x squared over x. Xx over x. And one of those cancels out. And I'm left with an x here. And then I have a negative 1 over positive 1. That's going to be negative 1. And then both these x's cancel out. Then I'm going to go to my second group and see what divides out of both of those terms. And the biggest number that can divide into 12 and 3 is 3. And I'm going to use this sign so I know I'm really dividing out a positive 3. I can divide out a positive 3. And then the least amount of x's is right here. There are no x's with this term, so I'm not going to divide out any x's. And I'm going to write down in parentheses what I have left over when I'm done doing my division. 12 divided by 3 is 4, and I still have an x there. And negative 3 divided by positive 3 is negative 1, and this is still set equal to 0. And what I see now is that I have the same parenthesis group. This parenthesis group and this parenthesis group are the same. And I can pull them out as a common factor. So I'm pulling these out as a common factor, and I only write it down once. So I'm going to write down that I have a 4x minus 1. I've pulled that out, and I only write that once. I cross it out because it makes it easier to see what's left over. And what I see that's left over is I have a 1x here and a positive 3 here. I'm going to write that in parentheses and say I have a 1x and a 3, and I set this equal to 0. And then I'm going to take each of my factors and set them equal to 0 to find out my x-intercepts. So I take my 4x minus 1 and I make it equal to 0. And my 1x plus 3 and I make it equal to 0. And I solve for x. When I move the 1 to the other side, I get 4x equals positive 1, or you can add 1 to both sides. And then I divide by 4, and I get x equals 1/4. And when I move my 3 to the other side, it becomes a negative 3, or I can minus 3 from both sides. And I get 1x equals 3, or I can say that this is really just x equals negative 3. So these are my two zeros or intercepts. So if I go up here and I look at my picture, so I'm going to go up here and look at my picture and say, well, this is right here, this is negative 3, and this one right here is 1/4, or the point would be negative 3, 0, and 1/4, 0.